When a devoted husband stumbles upon a cryptic text message on his wife's phone, his world begins to unravel. What starts as a quiet suspicion spirals into a calculated investigation, uncovering the truth about her double life and betrayal. Armed with irrefutable evidence, he sets out to confront her, seeking both justice and closure. But as the fallout unfolds, his quest for revenge leads to unexpected consequences, exposing the fragile line between love and despair. In the end, what began as a story of heartbreak becomes a haunting tale of loss, regret, and the devastating cost of broken trust. The morning started like any other, a frantic rush to get the kids ready for school, the clatter of plates in the kitchen, and the hum of life that felt comfortable in its chaos. Claire, my wife of 11 years, navigated it all effortlessly. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight as she darted between rooms, checking backpacks and handing out snacks. If I'd been asked then, I would have said we were happy. Solid. A team. I sipped my coffee, glancing at her with a smile. She caught my gaze and smiled back. "Don't forget, we need to leave early tomorrow for the cabin," she said, leaning against the counter. Her tone was casual, but her words felt rehearsed. Maybe it was the stress of planning, but something about it pricked at me, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. "I've got everything packed," I replied, pushing the thought aside. "Just looking forward to some time away." She nodded, a flicker of something, relief, crossing her face. "Me too." The conversation moved on, the morning chaos returning as we scrambled to get the kids out the door. By the time the carpool arrived, the fleeting moment of unease had disappeared. Claire kissed me on the cheek before heading out herself, her scent lingering in the air. I watched her go, my mind already shifting to the cabin trip and the thought of a quiet weekend together. The unease returned the next day. We were halfway to the mountains, the kids dropped off with my parents, when Claire asked to stop at a convenience store. "Bathroom break," she explained, pointing to the Wawa sign. "Be right back." She left her phone on the seat. I didn't think much of it until it buzzed, lighting up with a message preview, "Looking forward to tonight." My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen, willing the message to disappear, to be something benign. A colleague, maybe. A harmless friend. But the words lingered, their meaning too intimate to dismiss. Before I could process it further, Claire returned. She was running, her face flushed, her steps hurried as she reached for the car door. "Forgot something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She grabbed her phone without meeting my eyes. "Yeah, just realized I left my wallet inside." Her explanation felt too quick, her smile too forced. I let it go, but as we got back on the road, the weight of that text hung heavy between us, even if she didn't know it. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was overthinking things, letting my imagination run wild. But doubt has a way of rooting itself, and by the time we reached the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The weekend passed in a haze of forced smiles and half-hearted conversations. Claire seemed distracted, her phone always within reach. She claimed to be checking work emails, but I caught her glancing at her screen more often than usual. It felt like there was a wall between us, one I couldn't see but could feel every time she avoided my gaze. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the day. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something more? Her behavior wasn't overtly suspicious, but the text, the sprint to grab her phone, it all felt too coincidental. I told myself to let it go, to trust her, but doubt whispered otherwise. The opportunity came the next morning. Claire had gone to shower, leaving her phone charging on the nightstand. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my hand hovering over the screen. This was a line I'd never crossed, a boundary I'd always respected. But the text haunted me, pushing me past hesitation. I picked it up, the cool metal warm against my palm. To my surprise, the screen unlocked with a swipe, no password. Relief mixed with guilt as I scrolled through her messages. Most were mundane, conversations with friends and colleagues. But then I found it, a thread from a number saved as K. Can't wait to see you. Last night was amazing. Miss you already. My heart raced, the words confirming my worst fears. The messages were intimate, unmistakable in their intent. I stared at them, the reality crashing over me in waves. Claire wasn't just distracted, she was hiding something. Someone. The sound of the shower shutting off jolted me. I locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, just as Claire walked into the room, a towel wrapped around her. She smiled at me, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. You okay? She asked, her tone light, carefree. Yeah, I lied, my voice steady. Just thinking. The rest of the day was a blur. I played my part, laughing at her jokes, smiling at her stories, all while the messages replayed in my mind. Every touch from her felt like a lie, every word tainted by the weight of her betrayal. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but something held me back. I needed more than vague texts. I needed proof. The trip ended, and we returned home to our routine. But nothing felt normal. Claire seemed unchanged, her laughter just as vibrant, her touch just as warm. But I knew now that it was a mask, a performance perfected over time. And I played my part, pretending to believe it, pretending not to see the cracks. That night, as Claire sat scrolling through her phone, I made my move. I accessed our phone bill online, combing through the recent activity. It didn't take long to find the number, the Virginia area code that matched the texts. It appeared over and over again, spanning months. Late-night calls, frequent texts, a pattern that was impossible to ignore. I jotted it down, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was K? A colleague? A friend? A stranger? The answers felt close yet maddeningly out of reach. But I wasn't done. I needed more. Claire had always been meticulous about her finances, keeping a separate investment account from an inheritance she'd received. I'd never questioned it before, respecting her privacy. But that night, I searched our filing cabinet for the latest statement. What I found made my blood run cold. A $3,000 withdrawal, made just weeks earlier, during one of her work trips. The funds had been spent at a jewelry store. My mind reeled. She hadn't bought anything for me, or mentioned buying something for anyone else. The implications were clear, but I refused to jump to conclusions. I needed to know for sure. The next morning, while Claire was out, I called the store. Pretending to inquire about a warranty, I asked about the transaction. The clerk was helpful, describing the purchase, a replacement wedding and engagement ring set. Claire had claimed her originals were stolen, a story she hadn't shared with me. As I hung up, the pieces fell into place. The text, the calls, the jewelry, Claire wasn't just hiding something. She was living a double life. And I was no longer the man she shared it with. My hands shook as I poured myself a drink, the glass trembling against my lips. I stared at the photo of us on the mantel, our smiles frozen in time, a cruel mockery of the truth. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had betrayed me. And as the alcohol burned its way down my throat, I made a decision. This wasn't over. Not yet. I couldn't sleep that night. The discovery of Claire's double life played on a loop in my head, each revelation more damning than the last. The texts, the phone bill, the jewelry, it was all there, a puzzle that painted an ugly truth. Yet, amidst the anger and heartbreak, one thought anchored me: I needed proof. Solid, irrefutable evidence. The next day, I went about my routine as though nothing had changed. Claire was cheerful, humming a tune as she prepared breakfast. It was almost unbearable to watch. I found myself scrutinizing her every move, searching for signs of the deception I now knew existed. Every smile, every laugh felt calculated, designed to keep me in the dark. "Are you okay?" she asked, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. "You've been quiet." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Work's been crazy." She nodded, her attention already shifting back to her phone. The sight of it made my stomach churn. That device, so innocuous on the surface, was a gateway to her betrayal. But I couldn't afford to act rashly. Not yet. Once Claire left for work, I made my next move. I called a private investigator, a man named Tom Grant, who came highly recommended. I explained my situation, omitting certain details to keep the conversation brief. "I need to know what's going on," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Can you help?" "Absolutely," Tom replied. His voice was calm, reassuring. "We'll start with surveillance. I'll need her schedule and any information about her upcoming plans." I hesitated, the weight of my decision sinking in. Hiring an investigator felt like crossing a line, but I knew I had no choice. "She has a work trip next weekend," I said finally. "I think that would be a good place to start." Tom agreed, and we discussed logistics. When the call ended, I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. This was real now. I was unraveling a truth I hadn't asked for, a truth that threatened to destroy everything I'd built with Claire. But there was no turning back. The week crawled by. I played the role of the unsuspecting husband, forcing smiles and casual conversations while my mind worked overtime. Claire's behavior remained unchanged, though I noticed the subtle signs more clearly now. The way she guarded her phone, the long hours spent working, the distracted look in her eyes, it all pointed to something, someone else. By Friday, I was a bundle of nerves. Claire packed her suitcase with the same efficiency she always did, her demeanor relaxed, even cheerful. It was infuriating to watch, knowing what I knew. "I'll miss you," she said, kissing me lightly before heading out the door. "Don't let the kids drive you crazy." I forced a laugh, waving as she drove away. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my phone and called Tom. "She's on her way," I said. "Got it," Tom replied. "We're ready." The next few days were agonizing. I stayed busy with the kids, throwing myself into their routines to keep my mind from spiraling. But every quiet moment was filled with dread. What would Tom find? What would I do when I had the proof? On Sunday evening, Tom called. His voice was neutral, almost clinical, as he delivered the news. "She's with someone," he said. "They've been together since Friday night. I've got photos, timestamps, the works." The words hit like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Kevin," Tom replied. "From what we've gathered, he's a colleague. They've been meeting at a hotel just outside of town." I closed my eyes, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. Kevin. A name, a face, a tangible reality to the betrayal I'd suspected. "Send me everything," I said finally. When the email arrived, I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands trembled as I clicked through the photos, Claire and Kevin at a restaurant, laughing over drinks. Claire leaning in close to him at the hotel bar. Claire walking hand in hand with him into an elevator. The final photo was the hardest to look at. Taken through the partially drawn curtains of a hotel room, it showed Claire in Kevin's arms, her face lit with a smile I hadn't seen in years. It was a cruel reminder of what we'd lost, what she'd given to someone else. I sat there for hours, staring at the evidence. The anger I'd felt before had given way to a hollow numbness. This was it. The proof I'd needed, the confirmation of what I'd feared. And now, I had to decide what came next. When Claire returned home later that night, she was all smiles, her tone light as she recounted the conference she'd attended. I listened, nodding in all the right places, while the photos burned in my mind. She was so casual, so unbothered. It was almost impressive, the ease with which she lied. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I played along, letting her think I was none the wiser. But inside, something shifted. The man she thought she knew, the man she'd taken for granted, was gone. In his place was someone cold, calculating, and ready to take back control. The night stretched on, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. Claire slept soundly beside me, her breathing even and peaceful. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans. Revenge wasn't just an option, it was inevitable. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I made my decision. I would end this, but not on her terms. She thought she held the power, but she was wrong. This was my life, my family, and I wasn't going to let her destroy it without a fight. The morning after Tom's call felt surreal. The sun streamed through the windows, bathing the kitchen in warmth, but I felt no comfort. Claire sat across from me, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. She looked radiant, even cheerful. I wondered if she was texting Kevin, planning their next rendezvous. It was almost funny, how normal she seemed. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been fooled. But now, every gesture, every word felt hollow. I had the evidence, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. The photos, the timestamps, the name. Kevin. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine. Claire played her part too, her demeanor unchanged. She even seemed more affectionate, as if trying to cover her tracks. It was almost insulting how easily she thought she could deceive me. By midweek, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed a plan, something to regain control of the situation. Confronting her outright felt too simple, too satisfying. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I began by securing my assets. Financially, Claire and I had always been open, sharing accounts and responsibilities. But now, I moved strategically, shifting funds into separate accounts she couldn't access. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. If this blew up, I wouldn't be left vulnerable. Next, I reached out to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca. I explained the situation, providing her with the evidence Tom had gathered. "This is clear-cut," she said, flipping through the photos. "You've got a strong case, especially if custody becomes an issue. Judges don't look kindly on infidelity." The word hit me like a slap. Infidelity. It felt clinical, detached, and yet it perfectly encapsulated what Claire had done. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice steady. "You can file for divorce immediately," Rebecca replied. "With this evidence, you're in a strong position to negotiate custody and assets. But if you're looking for something more deliberate, we can build a case that gives you complete control over the narrative." I nodded, appreciating her candor. "Let's do it. I want her to understand the consequences of her actions." Rebecca smiled, a hint of satisfaction in her expression. "Consider it done." Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly, gathering every piece of leverage I could. Claire remained none the wiser, her behavior unchanged. She continued her late nights and mysterious work trips, oblivious to the fact that I was watching her every move. Tom provided regular updates, each one more damning than the last. Claire and Kevin weren't just having an affair, they were building a relationship. They spent weekends together, shared intimate dinners, even exchanged gifts. It was a level of betrayal I hadn't anticipated, and it fueled my resolve. The turning point came on a Friday night. Claire announced she was heading out with friends, a casual declaration that might have passed unnoticed if I didn't already know better. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile, kissing me lightly before grabbing her purse. As soon as she left, I called Tom. "She's on her way," I said. "Got it," he replied. "We're tracking her." I spent the evening pacing the living room, my mind racing. Around midnight, Tom sent a message, "Hotel again. Same room." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd known this was coming, the confirmation hit hard. I stared at the text for a long time, the weight of it settling over me. Then, something shifted. The sadness, the heartbreak, it gave way to something colder. Determination. The next morning, I called Rebecca. "It's time," I said. "Understood," she replied. "I'll get the paperwork ready." The confrontation was set for the following week. Claire had no idea what was coming. I watched her go about her days, blissfully ignorant of the storm about to hit. There was a cruel satisfaction in knowing that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. When the day arrived, I made sure the kids were out of the house, staying with my parents for the weekend. Claire came home that evening, her mood light, her smile warm. It made what I was about to do even more satisfying. "Can we talk?" I asked, my tone calm. She looked up, surprised but not suspicious. "Of course. What's up?" I led her to the living room, where I'd laid everything out, the photos, the emails, the financial records. Her eyes widened as she took it all in, the color draining from her face. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This," I said, gesturing to the evidence, "is the truth. Your truth. The one you've been hiding from me." She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. Don't lie to me anymore. I know everything, Claire. Kevin. The hotel. The late nights. I know." Her expression shifted from shock to panic. "It's not what you think." "Don't insult me," I snapped. "I've seen the photos. I've read the messages. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To our family?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lonely. I felt neglected." I laughed bitterly. "Neglected? You had everything, Claire. A family, a home, a husband who trusted you. And you threw it all away for him." She reached for me, but I stepped back. "It's over," I said. "I've already filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow. You can keep whatever dignity you have left and sign them without a fight, or we can go to court. Either way, I'm done." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire collapsed onto the couch, her sobs filling the room. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but emptiness. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. This wasn't the ending I'd envisioned for our life together. But it was the ending she'd chosen. And now, I was free to rebuild. On my terms. The days after the confrontation were eerily quiet. Claire signed the divorce papers without protest, her usual spark replaced by a dull resignation. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, even relief, but all I felt was emptiness. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kids were still at my parents', and the silence was oppressive. Claire moved into the guest room without a word. We communicated only when necessary, discussing logistics about the children or splitting assets. The woman who once filled my life with warmth and laughter was now a stranger, a hollow echo of the person I'd loved. But that was what I wanted, wasn't it? For her to feel the weight of her betrayal. On a gray Saturday morning, I woke up to an empty house. The kids were still away, and Claire had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Went for a drive. Be back later." Her handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. I stared at the note, a strange unease settling over me. Claire rarely left without telling me where she was going. I shrugged it off. Maybe she needed time to clear her head. After all, her world had crumbled in the past week. But as the hours dragged on, unease turned to worry. By nightfall, she still hadn't returned. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A cold sense of dread began to creep in. Something was wrong. I tried to focus, reasoning with myself. Maybe she'd gone to a friend's house or checked into a hotel to escape the tension at home. But as midnight came and went, my patience wore thin. I called her friends, her sister, even her parents, but no one had seen her. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized I had no idea where she was, or if she was safe. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police, filing a missing persons report. They assured me they'd start looking immediately, but their calm professionalism only heightened my anxiety. I spent the day pacing the house, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. It wasn't until Sunday evening that I got the call. "We found her car," the officer said. His voice was steady, professional, but there was a heaviness to it. It was parked near the bridge on Highway 17. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. "And Claire? Did you find her?" The pause on the other end was unbearable. "We're still searching the area." The next few hours were a blur. I drove to the bridge, my heart pounding with every mile. When I arrived, the scene was chaotic: police cars, search teams, and a small crowd of onlookers. I pushed my way through, my breath coming in shallow gasps. An officer met me at the edge of the scene. His face was grave. "Mr. Harrington, we need you to stay back." "What happened?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Where is she?" He hesitated before answering. "We found a note in her car. It suggests she may have taken her own life. We're searching the river now." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the guardrail for support. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible. She wouldn't." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. The note she'd left on the kitchen counter flashed in my mind, the shaky handwriting, the finality in her tone. How had I missed it? How had I not seen the signs? Hours turned into an eternity as I waited by the river, hoping against hope for a miracle. The searchlights swept the water, their beams slicing through the darkness. Finally, just before dawn, one of the officers approached me, his expression grim. "We found her," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry." I barely heard the words. My body moved on autopilot as they led me to the bank, where they'd laid her lifeless body. Her blonde hair clung to her pale face, her eyes closed as if she were sleeping. She looked so peaceful, so far removed from the pain that had consumed her. The officer handed me a small plastic bag. "This was in her pocket," he said. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it with trembling hands, the words scrawled in her familiar handwriting. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix this. Please take care of the kids. Tell them I love them. Tell them I'm sorry." Tears blurred my vision as I dropped to my knees beside her. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of it seemed so trivial now. I had wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions, but I hadn't considered the weight of my own. I had been so consumed by my pain that I hadn't seen hers. The days that followed were a haze of grief and regret. I struggled to explain to the kids what had happened, to make sense of something that felt so senseless. I told them their mother had loved them deeply, that her pain had been too much to bear. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the whole truth. Some burdens were mine to carry alone. In the end, I was left with a hollow victory, the ashes of a life I had once cherished. I had sought justice, but what I found was tragedy. And as I sat alone in the quiet house, surrounded by memories of a family that no longer existed, I realized there was no revenge, no resolution, no solace in the wake of such loss. Only the haunting question of what might have been.